Good morning, Florence.
Good
Thank you.
morning.
Yes, I love that beautiful smile. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining us at Trailblazers Impact. My co-host and myself, Nan McKay, and myself really appreciate the time that every one of our guests has given us, along with, of course, the sharing of their story. And I look forward to sharing your story today with our listeners. You are joining us as the founder and executive director of the Open My Heart Foundation. And I know that part of your story will be the sharing of how you even came up with the name of your foundation, along with the motivation to start the foundation. So with that, I'd like to ask you if you would start by sharing a little bit about the childhood influences that led you to, one, be both brave enough as well as directed to starting a foundation.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story. As far as my childhood influences, I would say that it dates way back to taking care of my great-grand aunt. I called her Aunt Ella. And I could remember being as young as 4 years old in her house. She used to take care of me, but I was also taking care of her. Her husband, Uncle Calloway, he built me a stool so that I could reach the sink to wash the dishes. He was a carpenter. And so I used to wash the dishes for her, get her medicine. She was a diabetic, and so she would take insulin. And she was a heavy-set woman, and she had difficulty moving around up and down the stairs. So a lot of times she stayed on the first floor. And I could remember, this might sound a little gross, but she had a slop bucket, and she used to go to the bathroom right there on the first floor in her bucket. And I would empty the bucket. And I did things out of love for her. When she wanted to go to bed or she wanted a bath, I would bathe her because she had difficulty moving around. And I could remember lifting up her breasts and washing underneath. And she had these folds of skin, and I would just lift them. I really wanted to do a good job. I was a little girl, but whatever my Anella wanted, I did. And I remember washing her hair in the tub and getting something and pouring the water on her hair, and she really loved that. And I would say that's as young as I could remember, going way back to taking care of my Anella, going to the store for her, getting some chickens from the chicken man. And as a little girl, I felt responsible at that age, but I also felt like I was a big girl. I could do this, and I felt glad to have the opportunity to do something. And Ella was glad to have me around, and I was glad to be there with my Anella. And it goes all the way up to my grandmother, which is my mother's mother. As a child, she would take me shopping with her. They had this outdoor market, and I'm from Philadelphia. So in Philly, it was called 9th Street. And you would see people yelling and 5 for $1, 10 for $1. They, as you walk by, and my grandmother would pick up something and saying, "You can keep it." And then they'd negotiate. And then she was tough. And then she would always get them to come down on the price that she wanted. So I learned a lot from my grandmother. She would always have these bags. I would carry her bags. I would hold on to her dress or her clothes because it was a lot of activity. I was kind of scared, but she was tough. So I watched her, and she would take me down South Carolina with her, where all of my roots are in Charleston, South Carolina. So I would say that being a caregiver at an early age had a great deal of influence on my passion to care for others, and that which eventually led me to go on to become a social worker.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, I no longer have to wonder what motivated her to become a social worker. I know you earned your master's in social worker. You're an MSW.
Yes.
So share a little, if you would, about your academic journey, when and how you decided you wanted to be a social worker. I certainly now understand the motivation and what again set the stage, but in the context of spending a career in the social work environment, what sort of, when do you believe that came about in your thinking for an academic platform as well as a profession? And then if you could share something about lessons learned from your years as a social worker.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I didn't start off saying I want to be a social worker. I knew nothing about the field. I really started off in college taking up special education because I always had a love and desire to help others. But there was a family member who had a son that was disabled. His name was Brian, and he was the cutest little baby. And I must have been about 8 or 9 when Brian was born, and he couldn't walk, he couldn't talk, he couldn't do anything for himself, but he had a beautiful smile. And so I used to pick him up all the time, and he would drool. Even growing up, you know, he had difficulty, but he eventually walked with a limp, but he could never really talk. And I always had an interest in, I always loved him. He was just adorable because he had this smile that would just light up the world. But I always had an interest in how can I help Brian, and what does it take to work in a field that would help someone like Brian. So I did go to school for social work, and I worked in the field for a little while doing field placement work. And then during my college years, I got pregnant, and then I stopped going to school. And so I worked as a legal secretary in Philadelphia. So that became my career for maybe about 15 years. And one day I decided I wanted to change. I was working, actually, prior to that, I moved to Maryland. I had a cousin that was living in Maryland. And I really liked the progressive lifestyle that a lot of people were living in this area. They were professionals, they were doing all of these wonderful things. It exposed me to a different level or realm of people. And I really, really liked it. She lived in Maryland, and it was a little bit country, and it was city, it was everything, and I really liked it. So she convinced me, hey, you should move out here. So I did, and I stayed with her a little while, and I eventually, in my legal secretarial career, started working at the White House. A friend of mine that we worked at a law firm together, and it was during the Clinton administration. They were looking for people. And so I had the opportunity to work there in the Office of Legal Counsel. And so that was a great, great experience. And there I met Duval Patrick. And at the time, our office was vetting him to become Assistant Attorney General. So when you go through a vetting process, you go through all these, his background, his Q&A. So I would just help people get vetted for their positions. And I also helped to vet Justice, now he's Chief Justice Breyer, and Chief Justice Ginsburg. So they came through our office, and I would be the helper. I would just help these, now, they've moved on to become great figures, but at the time we were doing a vetting process. So I got to know them and eventually went to work for Duval Patrick at the Department of Justice after he was appointed Assistant Attorney General. And so Duval, he always took an interest in education, what we were doing as young people and things like that. So I had the opportunity to go back to school. I told Duval I wanted to go back to school. He always was interested in what exactly do you want to do. So I did start going back to school. At the time, I went to school for art therapy because I'm also an artist and I have a love for art. And then after I achieved my, and I didn't go back to school till I was an adult in my 30s. So I would go back part-time. I would work for Duval at the Department of Justice. And then after I achieved my bachelor's degree in art therapy, I went on to Howard University to achieve my master's degree in social work. And so at the time, working in the help field, I was teaching, I was doing my art therapy, but I wanted more, and I learned about the field of social work through a counselor. And so that's when I went on to Howard University School of Social Work.
Wow. So now, when you mentioned your 30s, and I'm glad that you entered that age in this conversation. What age were you when you encountered your life-altering health challenge?
Okay, at the time I was 54.
Okay.
When I had my life-altering health challenge. So I worked as a social worker throughout Washington, D.C., and worked at various nursing homes. I worked for an organization called So Others Might Eat. So I was doing my thing, working in the field, and loving the work that I did. I worked primarily with elders because that was my first passion. So as a concentration, as I studied social work, my minor was gerontology. So that was my focus and my concentration at Howard University School of Social Work.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that life-altering health challenge that actually really changed your entire trajectory, both personal and professionally.
So I was experiencing chest pains off and on, and I wouldn't say they were really big crushing pains. So sometimes it would just be a shortness of breath. And so I'm like, whew, what's that? And then I thought maybe something was wrong with the way I was breathing. Something was wrong with the way I was swallowing. I thought it was me, and never did I think anything else outside of myself. I began to drink more water, and I was in a very, as you can imagine, stressful field. So I was working at a place where I was the director of social work, and it was a lot of demands on me. I was stressed. I was burnt out. And so my way of coping was just that this is the nature of the field. I have to take it. I have to be in charge. I have people's lives depending on me. I have staff. So I would always continue to run myself down in the ground. So when I began to experience the shortness of breath, I thought nothing of it until, to be honest with you, I lost my job. And I was going through a very stressful period. And so I didn't have any insurance at the time when I was going through with my chest pains. But one day I was in a relationship, and I was having a very heated argument with, at the time, my boyfriend. But I found myself going down on the floor. My knees started buckling underneath me. And I started grasping my chest and trying to get air. And as we were talking, I couldn't talk anymore. We were really in an argument, but the stress of that just kind of pushed me somewhere where I just lost my breath completely. And the only thing I could say is, take me to the hospital, because I knew something serious was going. So he did. So I went to the hospital, and they did a series of tests, and they didn't find anything wrong. And basically, they sent me back home and told me to follow up with my primary care physician. So this went on for almost a year. I would get the shortness of breath. I would start sweating. I would go to the hospital. I was, sent back home. So they never found anything. So I was used to breathing like this now, and used to thinking that nothing was wrong. It's all in my head, if you can imagine that. I remember one time they did give me something. It was a nitroglycerin tablet. They said, this is for when you have chest pains. And the term they used was angina. Mm-hmm. And they told me it was angina. I said, well, what is angina? They said, it's when you have chest pains. So I felt comfortable with that. I said, oh, I have angina, and that is chest pains. So I take these nitroglycerin tablets whenever I have chest pains. And that worked for a while. And one day I was going to church, and again, my knees started buckling from under me. And when I got inside, I was sweating, and I was about to fall, and someone caught me. And next thing I know, I was being rushed off to this room. I never saw nurses at church, but they were all these white outfits. Nurses were coming out to help me. And what was happening is my blood pressure was unusually high. It was like in the 200s, 200 and something, over 100 and something. And so they rushed me to the hospital. I said, at first, they said, we have to call 911. I said, I don't want to go back there. They said, what? Why not? I said, because the last time I was there, they told me to seek counseling, as if the pain was all in my head. So I had a history of going back and forth to the hospital and getting a bill and things like that. And so I did not want to go back to the hospital. But they insisted, they called 911, and I was embarrassed to be rolled out of church. I go to a very large church. I was like, oh no, everybody's going to be looking at me. But they did. They took me to hospital. Again, I had some tests done, again, to no avail. So this was my treatment, I guess, until I met a cardiologist. So I did follow up with my doctor. And mind you, each time it was a $100 bill when I went to the primary care physician, and I had no money. But my doctor did give me a business card of a colleague of hers. She said, call this doctor. He's a cardiologist. I think you need to be checked out by him. So I had that business card in my wallet. And one day I was going through an unemployment training program, and I was walking into a building because I was going to a meeting. But as I began to walk, my steps, they got shorter and shorter. I felt like I was climbing a mountain, and I started sweating, and I knew that there was this big glass door. I said, oh my God, I can't open that door. I couldn't do anything. I could barely walk. So, but someone came out of the door, and I was praying that there was somewhere to sit down in this building. And there was. There was a bench. And I sat there trying to catch my breath. And my breaths became shorter and shorter. And it was like I was sipping for air. I was no longer gasping. And the sipping was more like, I felt like a fish out of water. I couldn't breathe. And I went down to the floor. For some reason, I heard if there's a fire, there's air on the floor. And I said, well, maybe there's air on the floor. I went down on the floor, sipping. And then this man came by. He said, Miss, are you all right? And I held up my hand. I said, yes, I'm all right. I didn't want him to think anything was wrong. And I pretended like I was down there padding, looking for an earring or something. And as I would sip for air. And I just prayed while I was down there. I said, Lord, please don't let me die like this. It felt like I was down there an eternity, but it may have only been about 10 minutes. And slowly but surely, I started getting my air back. And I knew this pain was different. It felt like a stabbing pain. And I knew I started sweating and a pain started shooting down my arm. And I knew I had to be careful about how I took my breaths because I felt like this could be my last breath. But as I began to breathe, I pulled out that business card of the cardiologist that I was referred to. And I called them and I told them, I can't breathe. And they said, call 911. I said, no, I'm not going back there. The last time I was there, they told me to seek counseling, as if the pain was all in my head. So they put the doctor on the phone. And the doctor said, where are you now? And I told him where I was. And he said, can you drive? And I said, yes. I got up enough strength to drive to a colleague of his in this area that I was in. Long story short, the colleague did a cardiac catheterization. And the doctor said, you know, I see that you have a history of going to the hospital. They've done tests. Has anyone ever done a cardiac catheterization? I said, no. I said, I don't think so. What is that? And he said, it's when they inject dye in your system and they see if there's any blockage anywhere. I said, no, I never had that. He said, well, let me ask you another question. What type of insurance do you have? I said, I don't have any. He said, that's why you haven't had the proper testing. He said, don't worry, we're going to get you the testing done. Long story short, they did the testing. When they did the cardiac catheterization, they found out that my main artery, they call it the widowmaker, was 99.9% blocked. That's where two arteries intersect like a wishbone. Right there at that intersection is where my air and my blood was being cut off. And they had to do emergency open heart surgery. And so they did a bypass. And I just thank God for giving me my breath back and my life back because I was just about out of here. And as they were rushing me to the operating room, he said, Ms. Champagne, if we don't perform emergency open heart surgery, we're going to lose you. And he said, and when we do perform it, there's a 50% chance that we still may lose you. And can I tell you, when he said those words to me, the only thing I could think of was, but I didn't finish my book. I felt like I was about to leave this earth without finishing the one thing God put in my heart to do, was to tell my story. And that's the only thing that I thought about when I thought that I could be possibly gone, when he said, we still may lose you. Thank God I survived. And as I recovered, I laid up there in bed with my laptop and I finished my book. I finished my first book because I truly felt like God gave me another chance to finish this book. And as I was learning to breathe all over again, as I was recovering, my movements were minimal, but I had to finish my book. So that's when I completed my first book called Inez's Granddaughter.
Congratulations. And I just made a note on a pad next to me that says, emergency open heart surgery allowed me to fulfill my purpose. Because that is the great segue now that I'm thinking to your advocacy. And if you'll now share with us how you started the Open My Heart Foundation, the name, the mission of the foundation, and what you've accomplished as a result of this journey, this walk that God put this journey that you were destined for.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, as I laid there in bed recovering, I did have a nurse. I was considered a charity case, and they did send a nurse out to me every day, and I loved this nurse. She would help me walk and things like that, and she helped me learn. She was also a nutritionist. So she was an RN and a nutritionist, and she grew her own vegetables and fruit. And I was just blown away by this. I just had an awesome woman that came into my life and started helping me eat right and sharing things with me and things like that. But you know, Dee Dee, one time coming out of this, it was a very traumatic experience. I became very depressed. I was so depressed to the point I could remember one day questioning God. I felt like the devil was talking to me himself, saying, look at you, you still don't have a job, you could barely breathe, you have no money. I just felt all of these things coming down on me as I was questioning God one day. I really felt like Job in the Bible. I felt like cursing God and dying. And I questioned God, why did you let me live? Why did you let me live? Because I began to cry thinking about the condition I was still in. And God said to tell your story. And as I was crying, the only thing I had was a testimony. And I didn't know how to begin to share what I have been through. But I said, God gave, somebody actually came to visit me and shared that with me. They said, God gave you a testimony. And at that moment, I began to think about God saying to me to share my story. And that was my purpose for living. I said, you wanted me to live to share my story. Okay, I'm going to tell my story to anybody that'll listen. And I will give God the praise and the honor for giving me my breath back. So this woman visited me and she asked me if I would be interested in becoming a part of an organization called Women Heart. And Women Heart is a national coalition of women that supports women with heart disease. And I said, sure. And So she connected me to the right people. The next thing I know, as I was recovering, okay, my heart event was in March. In October
Of what year?
2012.
Okay.
And in October, they were flying me off to Minnesota to the Mayo Clinic to be a part of this organization, but I needed training. So I said, okay, I had to get a doctor's permission to see if I was well enough to fly and things like that. So I did. And so I had about a week's worth of training on heart disease, how to become an advocate, how to become a leader in the field, how to become a facilitator of support groups. We went through everything, what stents look like, how open heart surgery is performed. These were all leaders at the Mayo Clinic in the field of heart disease. And we went through, I'm just getting chills thinking about it, testimonials. Every woman there had been through something pertaining to heart disease, whether it was a heart transplant, I mean, you name it. And the thing about it is, we were all similar in that no one believed us what we were going through when we were going through it. And I later found out that heart disease presents differently in women as opposed to men. And a lot of the times, the doctors don't know the signs and symptoms for a woman as opposed to a man. So my symptoms could have been more vague than a man. Let's say a white male that might turn white, or red, or, you know, I'm a Black woman. You know, I don't get all these colors. So, and then, you know, I wasn't elderly, I wasn't overweight. I even had one doctor say, "Oh, you're young, you're fine," as if my age had something to do with it. Like, you don't look like you're going through anything, so you're fine. And I was told that you look fine. So we don't get treated the same. And if I'm going in with, you know, vague symptoms, and then I would say, well, my jaw feels funny, you know, it's hard for me to open and close my mouth. That was a symptom I didn't know of a heart attack. I didn't know about your arteries being cut off. And I would just move my jaw around. And so the symptoms were kind of vague. And now they're, you know, I've learned that they are being trained better to look at different signs and symptoms for women. I could remember getting lower back pains. I didn't know that that was a sign or symptom of a heart attack or heart condition. So that is one of the signs and symptoms. I would always have back pain. I just thought, oh, that's just me. I just have back pains. Oh, that's just me. I just have jaw pains. I never connected the two. So we learned a lot at the Mayo Clinic about heart disease and how to facilitate support groups and how to advocate for other people. I would go on Capitol Hill to testify, to talk about, you know, the treatment that I received or lack thereof, and funding and things like that. Even with all of that, so I began to speak to doctors, panels, and having discussions about what they may have missed. And so I became the face of a patient, of a heart attack survivor who did not readily receive treatment. Even with that, I felt like my story was not being told because I experienced disparities in treatment by doctors. I experienced turnaways from frontline people. And when you are told something like from a doctor or nurse, you believe them and you go home. And that's what was happening to me. I would believe them and I would just go home. And I became progressively worse within that period of time. So I almost I almost like to think of it as slowly having a heart attack, because I couldn't breathe, and it just got worse over time. I was not being treated. And so I didn't know I needed open heart surgery. And I didn't know that the insurance was blocking me from getting the full treatment or the lack thereof. And so it just made sense to go into my advocacy mode. I was already a social worker in my heart, at my core. When I came out of this and learned everything that I learned, I became angry. I felt like this isn't right. Somebody needs to hear my story. I began to have different levels of my story. I said, somebody needs to hear me. God saved me. He gave me my breath back, and I'm supposed to tell my story. This isn't right. And so I became an advocate for myself and for others. And I then started, even with the other organization, I felt like something more needs to be said. There needs to be more talk about disparities in treatment. And that's when I started the Open My Heart Foundation, because I needed open heart surgery. And I love the song from Yolanda Adams, Open My Heart. And it just made sense to me to name the organization Open My Heart. I needed open heart surgery. I was experiencing disparities in treatment, and therefore I named it Open My Heart.
Tell us a little bit about the stated purpose and mission of the foundation.
So the mission of the foundation is to help eliminate heart health disparities among African American women and women of color. I found that I was not alone, and I found that insurance plays a big part. And so that is our mission, to help eliminate those disparities. And we do that through, we have support groups every month for heart attack survivors, stroke survivors, and those that are at risk of heart attacks and stroke. And that is those with high blood pressure and diabetes. And you might have a family history. Someone's mother died of a heart attack, or father, and it's in their bloodline. I also had a history of heart disease in my family. I never put it together until I was educated about it. And so I educate others now about heart disease, some of the signs and symptoms, some of the preventive measures. I have professionals that come in to speak about the medications. I have pharmacists. I have dietitians, nutritionists come in. I have food preparation demonstrations by professionals that come in. We also give food away, heart-healthy food, fresh produce, once a year through our Heart Health Fair. And we then award the survivors by having a big red dress gala awards ceremony once a year for the survivors.
Wow, well, you certainly have covered the landscape from childhood to now full-fledged maturity and really establishing your legacy. In closing, I would like to ask you to share what would you want your legacy to be labeled as? What is it that to you really would summarize who you were, that you were here, you lived, you contributed, and in what way do you think that you have had the most impact?
Wow. I consider myself an artist, an advocate, and an author. And I do have those three titles. I would like my legacy to be that I'm working on a second book right now called Understanding Purpose Through Pain. And I feel like I went through a lot of pain, but not just physical pain, emotional pain. I've had my ups and downs with depression, family history, again, of mental illness, as well as it taking its toll on me with stress, anxiety, depression, and then turning all of that, a pain, unemployment, not having money, turning everything into a purpose. So I would like to think of my legacy as one that I heard a scripture about turning God giving you beauty for ashes. And I'd like to think that my life meant something because of the pain that I've gone through. And I then was able to turn it into a greater purpose, to hear other stories. And I'm always looking to hear other stories and to help somebody else, turn their legacy into a purpose as well. So now I get calls, people reaching out to me through my website from all over the world with disparities in treatment. And so what I do is try to find them resources wherever they are. I've gotten some people that have reached out to me from the Philippines saying, my father needs open heart surgery, but we can't afford it. So I get into my social work mode. I just look for them. I'm like, okay, let me figure this out. And then just help them right where they are. This is the place you need to go to. You need to bring those records, whatever. And so this is my purpose. This is my passion, and this is my mission. God gave me a purpose. I put myself out there. And so now, whenever someone needs help, I had someone say, well, I need a Hoyer lift. They can't get out of the bed. They're in a wheelchair, can't afford it. Electric Hoyer lift. I'm like, okay, well, let me figure out how to get it. So whatever the need is, I just put my social work hat on and try to help people right where they are. And now that we have not been having face-to-face support group meetings due to COVID-19, so I'm always, again, looking at, okay, what am I supposed to do, Lord? How do I help? I help with, checking on our people. What do you need? We need masks. We need hand sanitizers, we need this, that. So I really check on the ones that are most in need, like the elderly and the ones that may not have a huge source of income, and just figure it out. How do I get it? I put the word out there. I need masks, I need this, I need that. And then the help comes. So I was able to deliver over 200 masks to some of the residents in the senior community, collecting hand sanitizers. We helped with a food giveaway in Charles County, giveaway to feed over 200 families there. And now we've been asked to help facilitate and host COVID-19 testing for a medical lab who will be coming into the communities to the underserved. So that's something that's in the works now that we will be hosting to help bring it to the communities for them to get testing.
Well, Florence, I I almost regret having to bring this to a close because your story has been one of my most compelling. I've spoken to many, many, many women over the last 2 years since Nan and I started this journey. But one of the things I was reminded of as you were talking is that when Nan approached me about being a co-host on this program, she said, I want us to find women. She said, women with a story to tell. She said, women who will be comfortable with sharing their vulnerabilities, of really talking about, from where they came and what they've accomplished. And she said, those are the real trailblazers. Well, I want to close by saying you truly have established yourself today with me as one of our true trailblazers, because you've come from that place where Nan was hoping we would find women who would share that kind of journey. So I want to thank you. I'm glad that I've been able to help inform your agenda this year. And after hearing your story, I can say that I now know other ways in which I might be able to be of help to the Open My Heart Foundation. You're doing a lot. I congratulate you. And I do encourage you, when this is available, when this interview is available to be shared, to send it to your entire network. Everybody needs to hear your story. Particularly those that you're serving and your friends and family members that may need to know even more about your journey in the way that you shared it today, so that they can become part of that army of foot soldiers that you need to continue to push this work out. So thank you very, very much, and blessings as you go forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dick.